So welcome back to this ridiculous political experiment we're calling the Nigerian scam. So we're just recording a brief intro to our most recent episode where we spoke about, amongst other things, the recent Twitter ban and how that fits within our whole project here and ongoing conversation about the Nigerian scam. But before all of that, how are you guys doing?
Well, I'm fine. Aside the fact that work no gree me see front.
Yeah, we're doing good. Just trying to stay, working and focused, see, and function inside of this camp.
Relatable. Um, anyway, good. At least we finally made it back to doing recordings. And yeah, I mean, work, as Emeka says, life, um, work life, and politics, etc., have kept us away from the recording for the past few months. But I think we intend to be back with a vengeance, back like we never left. So yeah, it's good to be back. It's nice to reconnect with these guys. And in the interim, we've also picked up a world-class producer who some folks who are listening to this might even already know from TV, newspapers, or sort of art and music scene in Nigeria, an individual called Turner Iwer. So that's been good. That's injected some new energy into our whole enterprise here. And he's also very kindly been helping us edit and sort of troubleshoot our audio. So hopefully in the next few episodes, you should notice some dramatic improvements in our recording. And if you don't, then you know who to DM. And yeah, that don't DM me. You can DM Emeka, but also Turner. So yeah, actually, you'll hear his voice a bit on the recording that we're introing right now. So you know, if you hear an unfamiliar, very gentle voice, that's that's Turner. So yeah, I mean, in the episode that we recorded recently, we were talking about the Twitter ban and about some of the ins and outs of it that don't seem to have really been covered in a lot of the kind of social media and media conversation that has emerged so far, reflecting that. So, what do you guys think? How did we do in covering the Twitter ban? Are there aspects of the conversation that you feel we didn't cover, as much as you would have liked to, or are there things that we did cover that you thought we did a particularly good job discussing? What do you guys think? Emeka, I can see your hand as well.
I think if you ask me, we broached all the issues that needed to be broached. If that's my own opinion. What we didn't discuss at the time only just broke out as news, within the week, which is, the fact that the Twitter ban might be lifted soon because the Nigerian government has found ways to reach some kind of truce with Twitter. So yeah, that's perhaps something to keep in mind.
I agree with you, Emeka. At the same time, it's very important to understand that these conversations help us to broaden our scope as regards the nature of or the context that we're inside of, and of course how our ruling class maneuver to have control on society, be it new or old technologies from print press to social media that we have now. So it's really noteworthy to and very important to bring that to the forefront and let people understand that the ruling class that banned Twitter today will also try to do other things to firm up their control over society. As long as you have this antagonistic order between us and them. So it's very, very important to point out that fact.
Mm. Yeah, fair point. I mean, but how about this unbanning of Twitter, which is a really good point to raise? Like, so does that invalidate part of what we are saying, or does it does it reinforce some of what we're saying, or is it a separate matter entirely?
I don't think so because first and foremost, we don't know the conditions that's leading to the unbanning. We don't know if Twitter has allowed for more stricter surveillance or more access to information. We don't know the
Yeah,
details of what facilitated this unbanning. So, as citizens, we have to be on the case and try to see what the details of these conditions are. You understand? So I wouldn't go to sleep because they've unbanned it. Actually, I'll be more on guard to know if the Nigerian state has had a bit more grip on Twitter to have access to our information, or have it when they snap their fingers. So I don't see it as a full win. I just feel like we're more. We just have to be more careful and try to know what the conditions for this unbanning are. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So I agree. I agree with a bit of what OJ's just said. But I think that we have a fair bit of idea um, why the government has decided that it might unban Twitter. And we, I mean, what it is this is Twitter has agreed to set up an office in Nigeria. You know what that means for government, the state's control is what we might what might reveal itself in the coming weeks. But we do know that first things first, that Twitter has agreed to set up some office or desk, in Nigeria. There's a bit of furor, months back when Twitter decided to set up its headquarters in Ghana, and then Nigerians took to Twitter saying, why Ghana? Why, so pointing out why, for obvious reasons, state control being one of them, that Ghana was just probably the best place to site its headquarters. Yeah, so I think we do know, not much, but that's good enough reason. Whether it's essentially because the Nigerian state wants to exert some kind of control on Twitter, would find out in the coming weeks.
yeah. I mean, I think part of my concern that I expressed in the wider episode with the whole thing is that, I mean, like, social media has come to be viewed by certain wings of the kind of middle class civil society here as this sort of neutral tool that exists almost entirely to provide avenues for Nigerians to air grievances against the government, or provides this kind of like free space for people to organize political dissent and such. Um, I mean, why that concerns me, I mean, of course, some of that is correct. Some of that we've seen in like protest movements such as MSAS, which we talked about, and even before that, Occupy. But I mean, I was arguing in the show, and I continue to argue that, like, still, despite some of those openings, social media is not neutral at all. Like, it also comes with the agenda of like businesses, the multi-million-dollar enterprises that provide these platforms. So, some people might see the um, unbanning of Twitter as like some sort of progress, some sort of marker of progress for Nigerian civil society. Oh, we've gotten our main avenue for civic advocacy and for, like fighting authoritarianism back. But I think it's like a mixed picture. I think that, you know, yeah, maybe that some of that space that exists, to the extent that it existed at all, you know, um, has returned. Um, but so has, as OAG is saying, so has probably increased amounts of government surveillance, and also so have the interests of Twitter itself, right? Like, because the reason why it was pushing to have its platform unbanned is not because it's like the guardian of civic space in Nigeria and that it wants to have Nigerians air out their voices, but it's because it wants to increase engagement in the largest market in Africa. So I guess to me, like, once again, this just goes to show that to rehash what OEG said, like in a context of like dramatic class inequality, um, these like political maneuvers are not neutral at all, and they don't tend to redound to the benefit of the majority of people, um, particularly if we don't have kind of organizational mechanisms of our own that can actually fight for our interests. So when it's the government negotiating with Twitter on our behalf, or Twitter negotiating with the government on our behalf, it's not on our behalf, right? It's on their behalf. It's about them having more, the government having more surveillance capabilities, or Twitter having more market share, and very little about our own capacity to hold our government accountable or to organize protests or that sort of thing, despite the fact that occasionally we manage to do that. Is that too harsh?
I don't know. I think with time we'll see, how the agreement between Twitter and the Nigerian state plays out, as Emeka said. But there's this hunch in me that just says that look, what you're getting from the state, especially this kind of ruling class that we have, it's not all, you know, yeah, they want to set up an office, but it essentially means more control on what's happening on Twitter and, being able to move faster and deal decisively with Twitter if they allow certain things on their platform. So we'll see how much that will be for the freedom, for the enterprise of freedom and liberation for the country, and we'll see how much that means for the progress of Twitter as a company and a corporate entity. So we'll see how those two things play out in the Nigerian context or the Nigerian scam.
Yeah, to second side, um, yeah, I'd say that um, Twitter also has a lot to gain from you know the truce with the Nigerian government. Um, and I'm a bit suspicious of Jack Dorsey myself. I'm very hesitant to because he comes up once in a while with very funny tweets. So yesterday I think I read in passing that he put out a tweet to the effect that maybe Nigeria has 32% of the cryptocurrency market or in Africa or something to that effect. And um, I don't know. I really don't know what that means. If it's true. I mean, and it's also it can also be contested. It's where I mean. So I'm not sure whether he said Africa or whether he said the world, but I really don't know. Why he's in the front line pushing this whole cryptocurrency thing. And I mean, maybe down the line we might have to also think about all this buzz around cryptocurrency within the Nigerian you know um, state with by Nigerians generally because I don't know, but yeah, so that's where that's I just thought to chip that in. Yeah.
No, it's a strong point. I definitely agree, and I think it's something that we should consider coming back to because of the interesting like class and political implications, and because of how seemingly directly it ties into our themes of the scam. uh, and there's always something to say about Nigerians and the internet and money, and cryptocurrency is never far away from that conversation. But I think we should probably just start the show now, in the interest of time, and then maybe come back to some of these themes in later episodes. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So let's roll then. To get going, we wanted to kind of catch up on some of the events that have taken place in the past few months while we've been away that seem relevant to the kinds of topics we tend to engage with on the show. So, to begin, I thought we'd talk a bit about the Twitter ban, um, and the relevance of that to politics and Nigerian history and social life, or the irrelevance of that, as the case may be. Um, so, I mean, how do you guys respond to that? Like, how have you what Twitter ban go? Yeah, what are your thoughts?
So, yeah, for me, from my own end, I don't, I really, I think I'm more interested in the politics of the ban.
Yeah.
Um, I guess what I'm trying to say here is, I mean, the first question to ask is why was Twitter banned in Nigeria? You know, really, I mean, um, is the government right? Should we read, Twitter's own interference? By interference, well, I think what I mean is that basically, you know, the fact that they went ahead to delete tweets by the Nigerian president. So should that be read as some kind of imperialism? And would the government response
Hmm.
be one, that matched, the act in the first place? And what it also means for, citizens who um, kind of use that platform to vent, have conversations, and basically also do a lot of trading, businesses with, so-called vendors and all whatnot. Yeah, so beyond so the way I'd approach it is, from that standpoint, and then also to check and see how much of what it means for small scale businesses or small and medium scale
Okay,
enterprises.
approach it now. You're raising the questions, but you're not really
No, I mean,
addressing
no,
them.
I'm just putting it out there. I don't know if I have the data to go into any detailed analysis, but I'm just saying that that's
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I totally hear you. Um,
that that's yeah, that's one way to go at it. I mean, to go at the conversation or to start
Yeah.
a
yeah.
conversation about it.
To add a little bit more flesh to what Emeka said, like from our own analysis, there are some things that can coexist in the
Mm.
same space. You know, the yin and yang, the unity of opposites, all those kind of things. Like so, monopoly of the media space, social media space, and the technological advancement of countries, of course, imperial countries and all, would give them the power to do things like that. And then the unity of the opposite again is the nature of the ruling class down in Africa that is useless to start with. So those nonsense um, behavior that our ruling class or our leaders that they have as pseudo elites lead them down to the line of thinking that they can effect a ban when materially they are not technologically advanced to any level to impact any
Mm.
ban on any level. So, but they keep stroking their own ego thinking that they can affect anything. It's the same way they, like having big, grandiose appearances
Mm.
outside, and then but they have no stuff inside. So that band is showing that they are pseudo elites and that they don't have any technological advancement. They don't even have the material advancement to effect a ban which they can just say in name because the world is moving past crude control. It's more of a propaganda control, information control. And then when you're a country that is backward and that is non-productive, that hasn't advanced technology to any level, then you can only say it by your words of mouth, but it won't amount to any material change on the ground. It's the same way they make promises
Mm.
and nothing happens. So it's the same side of that coin or the opposite side of that same coin. Where you have people, elites that have an overbloated ego. I'm not saying that, just unilaterally deleting the president's tweet, is
Mhm.
not something that we can look at with an eye of scrutiny, but I'm saying that those two things can sit at the same place and then we can analyze Twitter's behavior and also go more, to analyze our own leadership's behavior because I still feel that the principal contradiction in this Nigeria is the ruling class. If we deal with our ruling class, then if we have a revolutionary government and we have Twitter banning or canceling our tweets, the whole country in unison can say, "Oh, they are doing
Yeah.
nonsense." But well, the tweet itself was inflammatory to some sectors of the society. So it's just I'm just
Okay.
trying to go in that direction to make us see how how multifaceted
Yeah.
that ban and then the tweet deletion,
Yeah, that
is
makes a lot of
or
sense.
was, yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. After you, Megan.
So let me just throw this. Let me throw this in real quick. Yeah, before side, then has a go. I think that I mean that there's a certain school of thought out there that believes that first things first, that the ban itself was some kind of witch hunt against Twitter,
Right.
for its role during the NSAS saga, and I think that that's a valid point of view. But I think that, like OAG has pointed out, I have enough head space to hold that as valid, as well as say um, that Twitter might have crossed the line just a little bit by deleting. I mean, we all saw how Twitter itself handled Donald Trump, during just before the elections. I mean, or even while the elections were going on. I mean, they resorted to flagging tweets. But I didn't see that they kind of deleted any of Trump's own tweets. I don't know what their rules say, and I don't know how much of a line that tweet crossed within their own rules. But even at that, you'd want to ask how uh, they have
Hmm.
sort of become arbiters of
Yeah.
social media space. I mean, but that's for me not it's neither here nor there right now. But I mean, I'm just saying, um, that there might have been a reason why the government, the Nigerian government, saw deletion of the president's tweet excuse to go after Twitter and get them to come and sit down on the table and negotiate how they're going to operate in the country going forward. But there's also the argument that Twitter shouldn't have gone that far. So I think that both arguments are there and they're on the table, and that they're very very valid arguments. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So there are so many angles to this question, as it turns out, and the more we consider it, the more they emerge. I So one of them is the question of social media and its role in gatekeeping information and its own kind of um, its own internal rules and such, right? Um, and there are, I think there's a perspective that I'm sympathetic to, which is that that role is somewhat outsized because these are not democratically run organizations. Like these are super hierarchical, hyper capitalist machines that exist in effect to get us to be addicted to their platform. So, what they are interested in is continually maximizing engagement with very little concern for the effects that has on society or on the psychology of individuals, despite the fact that they claim to care about the nature of content on their spaces. So yeah, there's a bit of a double standard, like the kinds of things they let on there and the kinds of things they remove, or even the end goal of removing or letting things stay on. And I think for me, this is part of what makes the NSARS moment complicated. Is that yeah, on the one hand, Twitter played a role in the passive sense insofar as people were tweeting, and also in the active sense insofar as Twitter created a new image, helped publicize the hashtag. The CEO of Twitter was tweeting about NSAS, etc. Right? And for me, okay, yeah, that supported the movement, got things moving further, helped direct some funding to the movement by kind of putting this sort of hashtag Bitcoin um, link on the map. But on the other hand, it primarily was I mean, you don't have to be a cynic or conspiracy theorist to see that that did a lot for Twitter as well, right? Like the point of that is to increase engagement, right, and to um, like not simply capitalize in effect on a moment of like real social upheaval to make sure that your platform goes as far as possible. So to see these guys, I guess, as neutral actors that are just trying to maintain civility or whatever, is to remove the market from the consideration, which I think is like childish, at best. And I know this is something all of you guys are aware of, but that kind of conversation as it's played out in the public arena has sometimes been distressing to me, where people see Twitter as like this kind of neutral or even angelic feature or force in society that's like here to protect, defend the rights of Nigerians to speak their minds. It's like, no, these guys are like, they're like a very, very like nimble enterprise supported by like a very savvy board of directors, looking at the global market and understanding that Africa is the future of the global market in the internet, and Nigeria is like a huge engine in that market. So when there's a social or political event going on, you can't miss it in Nigeria, and you shouldn't miss it if you want to be a serious business. And this is what people in the cryptocurrency industry are very aware of. Like they all, any new like coin or crypto that's issued these days are like, our plans for expansion is involves moving into Africa, and like Nigeria had hitherto been one of the biggest crypto markets in Africa. I think the biggest crypto market in Africa. So, these are not like neutral occurrences when like these guys decide to act or not act in our context. So but I agree that one has to hold that in the balance at the same time as one has to also be aware of what our own governments are, what our own government is doing and interested in doing. And the tweet that got deleted was a stupid ass tweet, like, and should have got, like, yeah, I don't know about the politics of deleting stuff, because it's like, you know it's almost kind of like erasing the moment, and like then these guys can deny it or whatever. Thankfully there are receipts, people take screenshots, and it's like people write articles about it. But the tweet itself is like, that's something we shouldn't forget, because it's something that ordinarily we should be able to use as a political tool to win, to fight back against these guys. So him saying, and I'm going to read it, many of those misbehaving today are too young to be aware of the destruction and loss of lives that occurred during the Nigerian Civil War. Those of us in the fields for 30 months who went through the war will treat them in the language they understand. Like that shit is borderline genocidal, given how like brutal the war was, and like how that quote language they understand often involved like indiscriminately targeting civilians. So, which we've already seen take place in the southeast, according to amnesty reports, according to like people who are on ground. So the tweet was wild, like and it's, again, there's the whole conversation about the way, the direction this government appears to be taking, from the point of view of how it's dealing with dissent. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree with both of you guys, with all of you guys, insofar as it's like you have to keep both of those sides of the equation in balance. And then the last thing I'll say on this, I know I've droned on, is that um, I think that the ban, and I know people are mostly getting around it via VPN, but the ban also, to me, went to show the extent to which the we've overestimated how much power social media has given Nigerians. Because it's like or how much power the social media enabled or social media savvy segments of our society have in our society. Because like one thing that seems evident out of the ban is that the folks in power realize that the folks on Twitter are effectively politically negligible, politically like they're like they don't estimate the political impact of banning Twitter as significant, right? And that says a lot about like their consideration of Twitter as a force in society. It's like, we're gonna ban you guys, and you can do basically nothing about it except complain and then get ways to work around it so that you can show us pictures of your food or tweet about your business concerns. But it's not going to have any impact on it's not going to have any impact on us politically. And they were proven
Yeah,
right,
that's
as
the
far
thing.
as I'm concerned, because what has been the upshot?
Sorry.
No, that's it. Like, what has been the option? What's been the consequence? So ultimately, it's like maybe we took maybe the folks online, I mean ourselves included, like took the online space too seriously in thinking that, oh, this is where the battle will be fought and won, and they're like, no, go play somewhere else. We can turn that button off, and all you do about it is like complain or find another way to get on, so you can look at memes and look at dog videos or whatever.
What I think essentially is that it's kind of should refocus the online guys to understanding the full historical duty on ground. That's fine. Social media and any form of media is a tool, but the work still has to be done on the streets. Like if we have organic your organizations on the ground, organizations that have feedback with the people, that meet with them, this might be a small setback in that we have to now be more on the street, and everything we want to do has to be face to face. But if we were already doing that, it wouldn't be too much of a setback. And at the
Mm,
same time, we must understand the class of people that are on this social media and their own interests. Is that it's not fully interwoven with that of the masses of the people yet.
no,
So that once they make it a bit tough for you to comment on what is political, or just they just make it a bit tough for you to act on the normal terrain which you would normally have been, then you can just hands off and say, well, maybe we should just go to TikTok and go and relax and do that kind of shit. But people that understand the historical duty on ground now have seen an opening point for the historical necessity of talking to people on the ground. This is what that highlights. That's
mm.
that for me. That's that for
Yeah, that makes sense. Me, I think TikTok probably even has better politics.
me. Yeah,
So,
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah.
like when I get on TikTok and see these Generation Z people with their purple hair talking about like ending capitalism, they really say it with their chest.
Like the shoes, and that's the shoes.
Yeah. Emeka, it seems you dropped out. Are you back?
I'm here. I'm here. I'm just
Yeah.
taking it all in. But I don't know. Sometimes to wrap one's head around Nigeria is hard work. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just crazy how. Uh, but you guys are right. I mean, what does it cost to be on Twitter 24? What do you think it costs to be on Twitter 24/7, or spend
Mm,
time on Twitter in terms of naira and kobo? What would it cost a month? And how many people have that money to dispense with in the first place? So
yeah.
I mean, there are people who even on Twitter, but then find a way to regulate, their time on Twitter, such that they spend, say, maybe even less than 5,000. But ideally, I think that it will cost at the very least 5,000. And that's if you have it as disposable income. Then the question then becomes, how many people have that much disposable income? So right, like Oiji rightly
Yeah.
said, the numbers you need you wouldn't get from Twitter. I remember
No.
that one time when CEO of Twitter, what's his name now?
Jack Dorsey.
George Dorsey, yeah, was in Nigeria. I think he pointed out to,
I think it's Jack.
yeah, Jack Dorsey, that Nigeria didn't have much, digital footprint as far as Twitter was concerned, and people didn't, people. So that, like you said, that whole overestimation, over exaggeration of numbers, when you can't confirm them, so it's yeah, it's a small network of people who are just talking. And even when you say 40 million, I doubt that you have half that number who are active, like seriously active.
Yeah.
You
So it might be 40 million users, but
Yeah,
many of those users are probably businesses set up by the same people. Like,
The
or
40 million number has actually never been verified. And then I've seen some stats where the number seems to be more along the 5 million.
That's what I think if you ask me honestly. I don't see.
Same. And also, by the way, like I think the sort of Nigerians on Twitter question often involves also Nigerians in Canada or yeah, Nigerians in the diaspora. So
And Said, hear this. I mean, there's a large chunk. I mean, Twitter is compartmentalized in that sense. So you have those who talk politics all day. You understand, and then you have
yeah,
people who just come
totally.
there to sell, their markets as it goes. But
Yes.
you also have people who come there for soft porn.
Oh
You
yeah.
have people who come there for all sorts of things.
Yeah, all the Tumblr,
All
the
right.
people who migrated
So
from Tumblr to Twitter because they blocked porn on
yeah,
Twitter.
yeah, yeah, and you don't find that these guys are interested in political conversations or such. So when you even talk about Twitter and in whatever
Active
the numbers are,
political guys.
when you see the political Twitter, what number do you think that you know? I mean, it's insignificant. So there's not really nothing that
Yeah,
with NSAS it was a totally different ball game, and because there were series of events that had led to that and that had happened outside the digital space. I mean, these were things that happened physically on the ground. But this conversation about whether people think Twitter is, I mean, it is, for certain conversations, um, but within a certain class of people. But beyond which, I don't think that there's anything that anybody can do about what the government says. I mean, in
yeah.
protest, all you can do is get a VPN. Yeah.
I should ask, do you not think finding ways around the ban is doing something?
Well, that's what I said. I mean, I think in protest,
Or maybe I didn't frame that question right. Yeah, not. I mean, outside of the protest, but just in general, when the government of the people determine that something is bad for the people, or whatever the law is that is put in place, if those people find a way around that law, is that not doing something?
I think doing something in Nigerian history, the kind of doing something that has tended to be effectual from the point of view of having a political influence is when we do something together in an organized fashion. So it was organizations like sometimes organized hierarchically, other times organized in a little more democratic way. But it was organizations that pushed the military out of power. Like it was organized resistance that won the very menial concessions that like working people and the poor have won in this country, some of which have now been beat back. And of course, it was organized resistance that ended the colonial state. Now we're now in an era where resistance to the state is fractured through everybody's individual profile, like and we're now speaking to our followers who are just this like group of fans, not necessarily like any
Active political
exactly
players.
exactly or any sort of structured um like members in some sort of like organizational format with a clear accountability structure. No, it's like it's even more hierarchical than the ordinary life because you tweet and then your followers get to comment about it and then you pick the ones that you want to engage with or whatever. So it's now this like hyper atomized and alienated form of social life. I mean, thankfully, it's not for a lot of people like
And everybody is a leader.
aha. So, thankfully, as we've said, like within our context, it's not the bullshit 40 million, and it's way less, right? So, thankfully, it's not subsumed all of the previous forms of sociality that existed before. And of course, it can't have that power, thankfully. But like, if resistance means just being able to log back into your own individual profile and update your profile picture, or again post pictures of your lunch, or make some like veiled kind of insult to your ex-girlfriend or whatever, then like I, is that really taking us further as a society, or is that really just continuing the self-obsession of middle class like individuals who can afford the 5K for non-stop data or whatever. So it just doesn't seem to. It seems to me um, like what the ban has demonstrated more than anything is the political negligence, or let's say the like the fact that,
The neutering of
yeah, man, the fact that like that class of people or that segment of society is politically negligible from the point of view of the elite. Like whether we ban you or not, like, oh, you there's very little you can do in response aside from like feel bad and like write some snarky articles or whatever. Um, yeah, and to me that's like OAG is saying, um, encouragement more than anything to move the battle, so to speak, offline, and like to the spaces where the majority of people actually continue to exist, and to connect to those struggles rather than to continue to believe that, the revolution will be hashtagged. No offense to hashtag revolution people. I mean, they'll have their own day, but
Now that you say this, I mean, forced to think about. I mean, the way I think about Twitter these days, and it's usually what I mean. It's the way it forms in my head is I can't shake off this whole. It's a phrase. I mean, it's sort of typical Nigerian street power. Follow who know road.
mm,
And so when you come on Twitter and then you see guys with massive following, you'd suppose that these are the guys who know road, abi way savvy, and 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 some of them have blue ticks, whatever that means. But if there's any demography that I hear the biggest bullshit from, it's usually that you know
yeah.
um, crowd of people. I don't want to start mentioning any names, but
Why not?
what I keep asking,
No, it's fine. I
what
hear
I
you.
keep
I
asking
think we'll start
myself,
mentioning names.
I mean,
No, we'll mention. I think we should start mentioning names. Definitely in our premium episode. So this is for those hardcore listeners. This is you should sign up to the premium episode. You want to hear the real gist of who exactly Emeka
you,
is
you
referring
know,
to.
and then these guys they're just there for their own selfish interests. Grow the numbers, um, put it to use by promoting whatever it is that their interests dovetails with, and you don't see how from where I stand. I don't even see how that massive influence that they managed to garner, how they can put it to effective use in terms of championing, you know, um, working causes of the working class, and but it's also a followership problem because I mean the question that's more um, germane for me is I mean how do you determine who know road? I mean, what are the markers to determine who you follow? And
Yeah,
what draws people to follow other people? What defines why I decide to follow um, an Omojua, for instance, or um, I don't know,
yeah,
the PhD guy. I always forget that guy's name. Anyways, but you know, those I think those are so. I think if we spend enough time, we actually do spend enough time critiquing, leadership, but we also don't do as much for followership, and this is something that ties into that something that OAG always harps about or harps on, which is what's the level of consciousness of people in this country, really. What's the level of consciousness of an 18-year-old teenager,
yeah.
um, or what's the level of consciousness of a 24-year-old young adult? I mean, what are they involved in politically, and why are they not involved
You're gonna have to speak up a little bit more,
in
man.
stuff? Yeah, so I mean that's for me. That's basically, yeah. That's for me is the nutshell. Something I think about when I really think about Twitter, even though um, it's not. I don't flog it,
Yeah,
but yeah. So that's why I agree with you when you say this. I mean, if you're upset, go and get a VPN, like me. Really.
yeah,
I would like to add that a lot of the criticisms that we seem to have are about the people on Twitter as opposed to Twitter itself. Yeah, and I guess that's because I think we all recognize that Twitter is a tool. But the interests of the people on it do not align with reality, I guess.
No, it's a mix for me.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it's not just about the people; it's also about the tool. Um, and this is kind of what I was trying to get at. When I was starting to speak about this, is that I think since the Arab Spring, at least, there has been this fascination with what the digital age will do for democracy, particularly in authoritarian context. Um, and I think that the Arab world has had a moment to process what has happened, and a lot of that initial euphoria and optimism has worn out because, like, the outcomes of that quote revolution of user um, like of digitally driven movements and stuff have been at best disappointing and at worst disastrous, right? And I'm not saying that's simply about the tool. Of course, there were political forces that drove that process beyond the tool, but I think the tool played a role. The nature of, like, the way in which you have to exist on these platforms has an impact on the kind of organizing you can do. And so it reduces people to either followers or leaders in a way that isn't necessarily, like, does not lead to accountability. It leads to some kind of, weird form of hero worship at best, very often. And that's only one of the issues that people have, like, highlighted with these tools and how they operate as supposedly neutral spaces where people can just air out their views and everybody's views are valid. Like, oh, the optimists say it's not like the era of newspapers where you had these gatekeepers that would decide what gets published or not. Now everybody can self-publish, but it's like you still have gatekeepers. They're called algorithms, or they're also called, like, the app themselves, the administrators of the app themselves, who delete tweets of presidents at certain moments, or who decide that, like, oh, okay, because it's going to help our engagement in this particular, like, country context, let's, like, emphasize that particular conversational thread. So it's not a neutral space by any stretch of imagination, and that became, like, painfully obvious during NSAS, right? When they were like, okay, now we're gonna actually actively get involved in this, for better or worse, right? I'm not saying that was all bad, but it seems like the tool itself is not just like a thing sitting on the ground that you can pick up and use for whatever purposes. And the design of the thing, even if it is sitting on the ground, limits the kind of purposes that you can use it for. So, and I just feel like that conversation about the tool, about social media and its impact on society, is happening in other contexts now. Like, people are becoming a little more critical of, like, say, Facebook and, like, disinformation and, like, Cambridge Analytica and all that shit. Whereas we still, like, on the kind of civil society end, in Nigeria, we still by and large think of these tools as, like, neutral, or as, like, oh, the digital world will save our democracy, or, like, this is the last bastion of liberty for people. And it's like, yeah, really? Like, as though these guys are not, like, businesses like Shell or Nestle or whatever that primarily exist to maximize profits for shareholders, even if that means
It
that
still it
to have.
still goes yeah, it still goes back to the level of consciousness, and what do we see society as? And a lot of people think the way things happen, what the news is made up of, how we report crime, how the economy is structured, how we see ourselves in terms of religion, how our cultural institutions are, they think these things are
Mm,
neutral, and that is why you carry that kind of thinking to the social media space too, naively thinking that it is neutral. There is nothing neutral in the superstructure of your country. Religion is not neutral. We've seen with
mm,
Sharia that is disproportionately, appropriated the punishment on the poor. We've seen that in religious institutions, it's the rich people that get to have a say and they sit in front. We've seen that in the court of law, it's the rich guys that can get the lawyers and all that. So it's the same way we have to look at all these institutions and what we call our social media, that these institutions are operating in a class
mm.
context. They serve societal purposes. And if you're naive to think that way, that they are neutral, then you run into certain problems when they disillusion you
Yeah.
at times that it's necessary for them to play that, savior role that you in your brain have appropriated to them, or that you've given or willed out of your own
Yeah.
ignorance to them. So this is where we have to help people see that you have to interrogate your institutions, know that you live in a context, in a class context. If a poor man steals money, there's a certain way the news is reported. If a rich man steals billions, they'll say he misappropriated the money. In that language itself, is showing us that you live in a class society. Like, so people should know the functionality of these things. It's not to reduce everything to war, but yeah, it's class struggle. This is what it is. This is the reality on ground. And it's getting so obvious now that the ruling class can do whatever it is that they want to do while they just expect people to sit down and take it. And this is part of the thing, or this is part of one of the things that contributes to the
Mm.
scam nature of the state and its existence itself. Like, we have to understand this thing fully, so that we'll be
I,
better
I
armed to understand, the context we're operating inside of.
how you take no wetin I wan talk? So basically, you wetin you dey talk be say na scam. Say Twitter
Yeah.
na scam. Sef.
Surprising conclusion, sir.
Yeah,
Fuck.
yeah,
Yeah.
nine be that, nine be that, now, nine be that, really, nine be that.
I think it's a big scam.
On a broader context, this is a conversation that is happening about the entire internet as a whole.
Mm.
Where um,
Yeah,
early on we all believed that the freedom of information that the internet age was going to bring us would allow for just more expression, more personal freedoms, more organization,
Mm.
better, just better and better and better and better. And we're finding that there are a lot of problems that have been cropping up because of that unfettered freedom, because institutions that we would ordinarily look to for direction are breaking down. I mean, I would say it has been both good and bad, because it has also allowed us to see the world in ways that we could never, like. There, there are things about the institutions that we have built that we would not have been able to see without this sort of freedom of information that the internet has brought on. But at the same time, that fracturing of trust in institutions has also brought us to a place that, where everyone, you, I would say there is a sort of mindset where you don't believe in anything other than yourself, or believing in anything larger than yourself is seen as a very risky proposition. I don't know if I'm making
No,
sense.
that does make sense. I mean, it definitely has like taking. People are much more like absorbed in. And I say people. I guess to be more specific, I think this probably applies more to like the educated and sort of middle and upper middle classes of our society, right? Such that I think the majority of people in society actually are not on these platforms yet, and possibly never will, at least in Nigeria, right? Um, but but I think for those people who are, yeah, I mean, I think it probably has done a bit to accelerate the kind of movement towards slightly more individualized form or consumerist form of engaging with society, like through your own online avi, rather than through any kind of organizational um, apparatus. So, without getting too jargonistic, people will say I speak too much grammar for the podcast, but this is what some people call
they'll be
disintermediation.
correct.
Fuck out of here.
They'll be co- they'll,
Uh,
they'll, they'll be correct.
yeah, whatever. No, but it's like the mediating institutions that used to, like political parties or unions or social clubs or whatever, that used to organize society, at least in the West, and I think it's debatable about whether this is true in our context. But, there's been a kind of slow erosion of these kinds of institutions in the 20th century. And in our context, yes, I think particularly amongst the middle class, like, it's like, I'm just gonna do church on YouTube or whatever. Like, I think a lot of people are increasingly alienated from those kinds of contexts. You're gonna order your banana bread on Instagram or, or whatever. you know, um, yeah, but maybe that says more about me than anyone else. But anyway, I think the larger point being that, I think that even as it's pulled away, even as it's like maybe freed people from being overly trusting in those institutions, if you want to say that, it's also elevated a new set of institutions that are less visible and less accountable than the ones that preceded them. So, to replace who insert institution that used to be powerful, now have Amazon, which controls a lot of the servers that our data is flowing through. You now have Google, these global behemoths that control a lot of our data, like, have a lot of influence over what succeeds or fails in the market, and have like humongous amounts of resources and capacity to surveil our day to day lives. So if you call that liberty, it's like, yeah, sort of, but it's like kind of maybe it's more trading one master for another. Um, and so that's where I would relocate this guy.
I think that maybe that's the lesson
Mm,
of history. Well, there's a thinking or an argument that I've heard, uh, basically about the 21st century. And it goes something like, um, the world as it is right now, the digital age that we exist in, is not going anywhere. Right? These changes are here to stay, and you kind of have to figure out how you are going to use the tools of the 21st century to effect the kind of change that would have been done by other means in the 21st century, that would have been done by other means in the 20th century and the 19th century, where organization was more interpersonal. People had more res- uh, personal responsibility with the movements that they were starting. There were known positions and leaders that could be negotiated with. I know that I've had conversations with older people who feel that, for example, the NSAS movement had no leaders and there was no one to negotiate with on behalf of the NSAS movement. What do you guys think about the idea that, you know this is the world that we're living in now, and the real problem is figuring out how to do the things that would have been done by other means today? Or is it just there is no way around it?
Well, I think there are changes bound to come, especially with the advancement of science and
mm,
technology, knowledge of the world, how things work, the human mind, all these kind of things, that science has given to us, and even other fields of knowledge and understanding. But what becomes the problem is if you have a dominant order that is antagonistic to the will of the people, then those tools in effect become the things that bar
mm,
progress, that imperils the human enterprise. Look at steam engines. Look
mhm,
at internal combustion engines and all that. They are good. They are good contributions to humanity, and they're helping us to remove the labor, arduous tasks of walking and all that. But on the flip side of that advancement is climate change, the destruction of the biosphere, and all that kind of things. And then you see that what becomes the tipping point is the big industry, big oil industry, big players that want to sell cars and all that, that now are supposed to evolve past this dirty form of combustion or this dirty form of energy generation because of their interests and all that. They won't evolve because the dominant paradigm is for profit and maximization of
mm,
control. If it was an order that carried the whole human enterprise along, you see them quickly responding to the climate catastrophes by mobilizing this huge resource they have into cleaner forms of energy. But you see, oil is still dominant. A lot of things that we're supposed to have moved past, are still the dominant players. Because both in the center of capitalism or in center of capitalism, like the industrialized world and all that, you will see that some form of environmental awareness, kickback, to the way they destroy the environment is high. But in the periphery here, like in the underdeveloped countries and all that, you see the destruction of Ogoni land, the Niger Delta, and all. Like they do it without any form of recourse to even paying or cleaning up. They've been dragging their feet, on the cleanup. So it's not so much about the tools and the advancements, but more about the context that they fall into and how they are being used, maybe for domination of the people, for profit, and what we Marxists call, the context of social antagonism, like we exist in an antagonistic social order where Twitter and all these social media tools now become, instead of things that amplify our voices, that we used to enjoy our diversity, that should be used to enjoy our diversity and collectively share our views, now becomes a tussle once more of power and who can dominate who. And you see that playing even in Africa, Jollof Ghana rice or Senegal rice, this, that, this, like, so it's just the vibe that it creates. It's not human advancement would go on, but the kind of advancement might be the problem. And the kind of advancement that we're having in the 21st century is proven to be more negative because of the kind of social order that's existing both locally and internationally now. So that would be my own submission to that.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're probably pressing for time here, and surely we can use some of this stuff down the line, even if not in this episode, because I think it's a lot of good material. But um, yeah, to respond as well, I should just say that to the question of can we use these 21st century tools, we being kind of the people, let's say, right, or popular movements, that are opposed to the current economic order. Yeah, I think there are ways to use, like, no, there are ways to use these tools as there were ways to use the newspapers or the radio that also were dominated by, like, economic forces that by and large um were not open to the kinds of political directions that the, the masses were interested in, right? And they were, so those previous forms of communication. I shouldn't even say previous in our context, because like radio is still probably much more powerful than newspaper, not to talk of Twitter in our context. So we live in all the centuries at once, in a sense, here. But if those tools were able to, if people were able to use those tools, by people, I mean the masses, or the kind of the popular movements were able to use those tools to their benefit, then there is definitely a way to use digital tools to our benefit as well. I just don't think that we've necessarily seen that model emerge quite yet, because since the internet usership and social media usership in Nigeria has been expanding, I don't think that our freedoms or our democratic rights, or our the actual distribution of economic and political power has expanded at the same level or in the same manner. So if it's possible to use those tools, which I think it probably is, I don't know that we've exactly figured out how. It's not clear that we figured out how. Um,
Yeah. Let me just add this real quick. Yeah, I think that my own contribution will go this way. Um, for me, it's about the stage of development. You know, um, vis-a-vis the Nigerian demography. When you think about it, if we're right when we say that um, the median age in Nigeria is about 17 or 18, it would mean that there are a lot of people who are between 0 and 18 who possibly are not social media. All right. But so you're as a tendency. I mean, people essentially who think about the working class or the revolution, well, ideologically or different from the guys who are in power today. I think that it's it's very useful to think about the future, and think about it in terms of when people who are maybe 17, 18 today, who probably also on Twitter, but I'm very sure that's a very small number of them because there are impediments. There's the cash flow, there's what you consider as disposable income, things that limit them. But we also think that as things get better, as they move from one stage of their life to another, they might be able to afford these things. And that these platforms of ours, spaces for engagement, but I think that the real tragedy will be to dwell on this place spaces and not think about how to reach people otherwise, where they are. Because I think it was Negroponte who in Being Digital, one of those books, said that while people think that the real gulf between those who have access to information and those who don't have lie um, within the age divide, that he no, that, sorry, not within the have and have nots, really, that he thinks that it's more generational. So I think that I mean it's safe to say that as young people move up the social ladder, they're the guys who would use these tools more. You're not going to be asking a 60, 65-year-old, 75-year-old person right now to give much time to Twitter or to give much time to Facebook, or those are not platforms. I mean, they even struggle to use WhatsApp as they were, but so I think that one way to think about it is to understand that we might not be there yet, but that there will come a time when we might have, actually 40 million Nigerians on Twitter, and that's massive, really. If you have to meet them, there, especially those guys who you think your audience is, the guys who you want to reach, basically.
I would say that before that time comes, the left or the folks who are interested in like economic redistribution and like more political power for the majority need to get their shit together and figure out how to use these tools, because otherwise, we're just gonna have like the influencers or the like hyper conservative big men who dominate in the real world dominate these platforms as well. Um,
That's that's very essential.
yeah. So yeah, just noting that we're way over time with this conversation. Thanks for facilitating a lot of that.
Yeah. All right. I think that's a good place to end it.
Yeah.
Peace.
Peace, y'all.
Leaders.